The game was rigged from the start. This is a very important video to watch if, well, you're anyone living anywhere in the world.
This is a video about the most important, yet most ignored concept in world power. It's the reason some nations fall behind, while some get ahead. Why the world is so uneven in its spread of wealth and power. Every year,
We're basically talking geographic determinism. It goes a little bit deeper than just that, but I think this is definitely an aspect to this entire video.
Why the world is so uneven in its spread of wealth and power. Every year, more and more people are asking about American decline. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of hope. Yet what none of it talks about, that on a planet so random, so different, so spread out, the physical land under our feet is the ultimate constraint on what choices a country has. Why?
Yeah, so the video is titled America Will Be the Last Superpower, and as I started this video off, the game is rigged from the start. The US has an unbelievable geographic advantage that is going to make it very, very difficult to not be a superpower. In fact, there's only one way I can think of. There's only one way, and we're going to get into that deeper into this video.
Why is China doing that? Why hasn't Africa caught up? Why is that place on the map always having problems?
Now, when it comes to China, we're going to get into it, but you got to remember that China has always been a world superpower. Now, they've had their moments where they struggle severely, and they know it. They know about it too. They call the previous century their century of humiliation. That's because it's not normal for them to struggle so much on the world stage like that, and now they're really trying to make sure that that never happens again.
Every feature of land can be positive, negative, or neutral for the country that occupies it. The big flat area stretching from Moscow to Warsaw is a negative for Russia. It's hard to defend. Germany and Napoleon War.
I love this video so much because he talks about so many of the topics I cover in every single video that I do on this channel. There's literally flaws. That's what I love about studying history, is if you understand the geography, you can understand the number one kryptonite, the Achilles heel to so many empires throughout history.
Their armies
and the ones that they still have currently, even in 2025 right now. They still have the same Achilles heel that they had 500, 1,000 years ago. It's crazy.
Right through here. The Himalayas on China's western border shake out to be neutral, giving protection from countries on the other side, but denying China overland access to the Indian Ocean, severely limiting trade and military options. On the other side of the coin, the Mississippi River Basin has more navigable miles of river than the rest of the world put together, giving the U.S. a major surplus of food and a cheap way to transport it. Look at all these kinds.
Yeah, that's why the Louisiana Purchase, when we purchased all that land from the French, was considered one of the greatest human investments of all time. Pretty much bar none.
It features over every country, and the ordering of the world clicks into place. So let's play a game. The first known humans evolved out of Southeast Africa, slowly spreading out across the world as they settled into the 6 cradle of civilization societies.
So it's like, well, it starts off in like Mesoamerica, and then Egypt and the Indus Valley region, and then basically China. That's only 4 I think I got so far.
In Mexico, Karasupe in Peru, Nile in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Indus in India, Yellow River.
Oh, my bad, I forgot Mesopotamia. That's like the most obvious one. That's the one that they freaking hammer home all day long. I saw a funny TikTok about that literally today, this morning, about how history teachers be talking about Mesopotamia like it is, like it's literally Agartha. That is how my 6th grade history teacher talked about Mesopotamia. It's the equivalent of Agartha to Gen Z.
We're in China. You want what every country wants, to be at peace, growing, prosperous for as long as possible. One of these original 6 did far better than the rest, with the outcome largely predetermined by the features of land around them.
Yeah, the answer is Egypt.
Doing that, which would
Sorry, I gave away the answer, but the answer is Egypt. I knew that. We knew that. If you've watched this channel, I think I've talked about it many, many times. History memes really drives that home. r/history memes. Whenever they talk about basically rivers. What river would you rather have? The Yellow River or the Nile River? It is not even close to, it's not even a competition. And the Nile is just so much more reliable. He's going to get into that.
To start as, food is critical. A population can't grow without it. You'll of course want fresh water, something reliable and plentiful. People and your crops depend on it. A natural barrier would be welcome, something invading armies would struggle with.
Yeah, and this is something that I talk about occasionally, but you know, it's easy when you hear natural barrier, you think automatically a massive mountain range like the Himalayas, or what else is there? That's like the big one, a natural barrier. Sometimes it's the Amazon rainforest, but you know what is a great natural barrier? The Sahara Desert. The Sahara Desert might be the best natural barrier because, well, for a civilization like Egypt, they don't need to worry about a massive army with millions of troops traveling through the Sahara Desert from the south to the north to come conquer them.
For those that said the Nile, tell them what they've won, Bob. Yes, the 138 pyramids built in early Egypt.
Which, funny enough, I mean, maybe this is partially an aspect to why the pyramids is the only ancient wonder that still stands today. There's a lot of aspects that go into that, but I'm sure that is a factor. Egypt has been a pretty constant throughout history. They've always been at least a moderate power most of the time. Just like I was getting into earlier about China, I mean, it's normal for them to be one of the strongest nations in the world. There was a brief time in our most recent history where they weren't, but that was not the norm. That's not supposed to be the norm. And them being up there towards the top, like we're seeing them right now, that's just kind of how it's been. Like that's gonna be normal. Just ask the aliens that have been watching us, that have been studying us all this time for like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years.
An accident. You need stability for that.
Not to say, I don't know if I believe in the aliens and if they're watching us. Maybe I shouldn't confuse people about that. Maybe they are. I hope they are. I hope they come down here and stop this simulation whenever it gets a little bit too crazy.
And the Nile was the most stable society the world has ever known for three predictable reasons. One, it had the best river, most reliable, and not flooding to a degree that every so often it kills 10% of your people, making it easy to grow food. Two, the flatness of the river made it easy to transport things from the upper down to the coast. And three, the people floating down along the river and living by it barely had to think about an invading army because the desert on either side was the world's best defense against the militaries of the time.
This is a very good natural wall. I mean, how often do you see massive armies come from sub-Saharan Africa through the north? I mean, it's been very rare throughout history.
No one wants to march across that much desert today, let alone 4,000 years ago. Egypt, the last of the 6 societies to be standing, made it 3,300 years. The invasion of Egypt...
There are certain things to keep in mind because obviously throughout history, if you study history, there's like rises and falls of empires. The British Empire is the perfect example. I mean, the British Empire dominated for like 2 centuries, 3 centuries there. But now look at them. They are not dominating. It's over, basically, for them. And it's been over for them for a while. So people are going to have empires, empires are going to have their rise and falls. Egypt had theirs and its falls. One way that I can see a rise into the future out of a landmass that, like, definitely no one would think of now, but maybe in the 22nd century, 100 years from now, maybe they would rise if there's some sort of key natural or rare mineral or resource. For instance, oil, for example. Oil has really put Saudi Arabia and all the Gulf Arab states on the map as of only really about 75 years ago. They will more than likely dip back down again when oil becomes less crucial for humans. But what will take its place? And what new nation will rise up?
Knocking off the last of them kicked off the great global shuffle as the world's population began to boom, going from 200 million in year 0, 500 million by 1500, getting big enough that people are really starting to bump into one another, wanting that greener grass, kingdoms merging and splitting. Europe is one big revolving conflict.
Is this AI video right here? This looks a little like AI.
Like China's kingdoms war, Japan war, Africa war. By 1800, we're at 1 billion. 1945, 3 billion. And then suddenly, the math changed.
Nukes. See, that's the thing. Technology always changes. I was just talking about how we don't know what resource is going to be important to humans in 100 years from now.
Really going to invade them? What if they have nukes? Borders started being redrawn much slower than the previous 2,000 years. Earth's geography lottery, what it blessed and cursed nations with, became locked in.
That's a good way to put it. Earth's geography lottery became locked in because with the introduction of nukes, you can't just have massive military, movements, massive, territory being taken up and eaten up by other countries like they did pre-nukes. I mean, just think of like we were just talking about the British Empire. They literally just took all of South Asia and conglomerated it and put them in their own empire. From Pakistan to Myanmar and India and Sri Lanka and everything in between.
Starting with the United States as governor of Earth's most enviable landmass. stretching 1/4 of the way.
I mean, I kind of get tired of talking about it, but the United States exists on an island by ourselves in between two giant oceans. We are so gifted. We're so blessed. Like, there's just a huge geographical advantage we have over the rest of the world. That's why I'm saying, like, even if the U.S. faces some sort of major economic crisis that affects us for like 100 years, we're still going to be a player just because of the makeup of where we are on the globe.
Way down the globe, glaciers from the last ice age.
Unless like an asteroid specifically hits somewhere in Kansas and blows us all up, maybe that could happen. Or I guess if the entire world nukes us without, you know, everyone else nuking us back.
Deep canyons into the edge of the land they blanketed. Deep canyons on coastline are what create natural deep water ports. One does not simply make a deep water port. All over Europe, natural ports. All over North America, natural ports, giving Europe, whose ports, critically, didn't freeze in the winter, by far the best ship design and navies.
And this is why we're going to get into Russia's weakness, one of Russia's Achilles heel. They don't have a lot of these.
Of the time, ships and navies that could leave the ports of Europe, but then also easily land and keep landing in the natural deep water ports of North America. New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Baltimore, quickly establishing highly productive settlements they use as a foothold to push west across North America. Ports, people, the land along the East Coast, great. But that was not what cemented the United States into an inevitable superpower. It was the Louisiana Purchase.
Bam, there we go. We're going to talk about it. And it's really to help, and it was really, the French were just like, yeah, screw the British. We were immensely, we benefited immensely from just the fact that the most of the world were just like, we just don't want the British to be the superpower. It was the French that said that. It was the Russians that said that sold us Alaska. Obviously, the Spanish and the Dutch definitely play into that as well, just because they helped us gain our freedom, our independence during the Revolutionary War. Like, everyone was just kind of banding together to just be like, honestly, anyone with the British, that's fine if it's America.
A legal guarantee that no other European power would colonize or explore this area of land was purchased for $340 million in today's money. But what would that piece of land be worth today? I mean, it's a truly priceless section of the United States. There is no scenario under which
St. Louis. I just learned the other day you can go inside this. I actually knew that, but I was reminded that again, that you can go inside this ark.
America would sell the middle of the country. But if you had to come up with a dollar value for it, it's worth at least...
Oh yeah, I think I saw this part on TikTok. That's why I knew about this part.
$60 trillion, and I personally think that's kind of low. But $60 trillion, that would be a 17,640,000% increase on the purchase price. Thomas Jefferson taking the crown of probably the best investment anyone ever has made. So try as hard as you can, and it would still be very, very hard to overstate the importance of the Mississippi Basin.
I would say that it was a very crucial moment for sure, buying the Louisiana Purchase, and then obviously the proceeding. That's what really was able to make out the whole Manifest Destiny thing. I mean, a big factor that the U.S. really needed to do in the early days was just to get the physical human beings over here. We needed migration. We needed people to escape from Europe or Asia or Africa. Unfortunately, we used slavery to help, build the country in those early days. But that was the biggest weakness that we had in the early times. We needed to draw as many people over as possible. So that's where the whole what's it called? The pursuit of freedom and to escape tyranny and all this stuff. But that, at the end of the day, it was a marketing pitch to get people to come here because we had all this land, but we didn't have the people to develop the land.
The best farmland the world has ever seen. It's all connected via a series of very flat navigable rivers. As I said earlier, it has more navigable miles of river than the rest of the world put together. But then it empties out into the protected Gulf of Mexico, giving the U.S. an outlet into the ocean from the middle of the country. France knew full well what they were selling. They knew the land was so good, they sold it to the U.S. to screw over England.
The sale assures forever the power of the
Okay, this is definitely AI.
United States, and I have given England a rival who sooner or later will humble her pride.
France being at war with Britain, the money was part of it, but the sale did, in fact, guarantee that in a couple of short centuries, the U.S. would surpass Britain by
I think that the European powers, if they wanted to stop us, they had one singular moment, maybe, and that was to support the South during the Civil War in the 1860s. Now, I don't know why they would ever do that, because the British at that time definitely did not support slavery, and I don't think a lot of people really wanted to support the South, which is why, though the world watched what was going on, and even though the Confederate States were asking for help, nobody came to their aid. But that was the one moment where you could have maybe stopped the inevitable American superpower.
A lot. Building on the strong footing in the East, the U.S. used it to push out Spain and connect the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean, forming the greatest military defense still today that exists. 3,000 miles between the constantly warring Europeans and 4,500 miles from Asia. This Great Blue Buffer is the main reason the U.S. is the only highly developed country that hasn't had to rebuild over the last 150 years. Great.
Yes, and then I think it also helps a lot. It should be noted the fact that, like, Canada is too high up north. They have a lot of land, but it's too high up north. It's too much tundra, too frigid. They can't hold a lot of people. So we've got a weak neighbor in the north, and then we have a weak neighbor in the south, too, with Mexico. They have a lot of people, but they don't have the land. Funny enough, Canada doesn't really necessarily have the land either. You know, if you look at like where everyone lives, it's all up next to the border with the USA because that's the only like not frozen part basically. But yeah, it helps that we don't have threatening neighbors either.
The U.S. has all this cool land, and here's where it all comes together. Relative to what? The power games nations play, the great game as some call it, is largely based on what the land under each country allows them to do relative to other countries. So here are 4 very specific examples of how major countries lack the geographic power of the United States.
Yeah, I mean, Russia comes to mind for sure. I mean, Russia is like almost twice as big. Current modern day Russia is almost twice as big as the USA, and they were massive when they were the Soviet Union back in 1991.
China has access to...
Now, China's a good one because China is about the same size geographically as the USA. However, look at all these neighbors. And let me tell you, all these neighbors hate China.
Just one ocean, the Pacific. And
not all of them to be fair, but a lot of them really despise China.
That access is gated by the Philippines, Japan, and Taiwan, and the rest of the countries that border the South China Sea.
It would be really helpful for China to have access to the Indian Ocean as well, a secondary ocean, and there's lots of reports that they're trying to do that through Myanmar. They're building like a railroad so they can ship things out through Myanmar, and then immediately they would, get to the Indian Ocean, and that's much easier to get through the Suez Canal and get to the European trading ports, things like that.
All mostly unfriendly to China.
But yeah, China needs... they don't need it, but they would definitely like, and they'd be heavily incentivized to find some other way. But yeah, they only have one ocean, whereas the U.S. has 2.
Which historically has left the country in a bad spot in times of conflict. All of its trade passes...
It's not the worst thing ever, but yeah, I mean, they have to face... obviously rivals out there with the Philippines, with Taiwan, with South Korea, with Japan.
Within an easy plane's distance of an unfriendly country, and 80% of its oil goes through the Malacca Strait, a very narrow choke point. So for the past 2 decades and tens of billions of dollars, China has been working very hard to secure overland access to a second ocean, the Indian Ocean, trying to connect the Karakoram Highway to a deepwater port in southern Pakistan.
Okay. So he's talking about this way going through Pakistan. You probably do want to invest in as many countries to do this as possible because just in case one decides to, flip the switch and decides maybe to become really anti-Chinese for whatever reason, maybe you don't need the Pakistan route. You have the Myanmar route as well. India's probably not going to give it to them because India is a regional rival. Again, the big problem for China is they have so many enemies that surround them.
Pakistan, and rail and pipeline over the West Mountains to the coast of Myanmar. These are the only 2 ways China may ever be able to drive a truck from within its borders and load the cargo it carries onto a ship.
But even that is just not guaranteed to be safe forever. You know what I mean? Like, who knows? Maybe in 20 years, Myanmar civil war will finally end, and who knows? I mean, here's one thing. The CIA, the USA is very good at cooing governments, getting different governments in charge and putting in Western allied leaders. So boom, a Western allied leader comes in charge of Myanmar and decides, hey, China, stop doing that. We're not going to allow you to ship your things through our territory anymore. Same for Pakistan. That could also happen for Pakistan.
Making China's military position, offensive and defensive, relatively poor compared to the expansive ocean access provided by the Atlantic, Gulf, and Pacific coasts of the U.S. 4 times the size of Europe, the second largest continental population after Asia. Africa's promise has been so high for so long that
they've got so many resources too. It's very sad. Unless like Africa, I mean, Africa is just such a big place too difficult with the cultural differences, with the religious differences, with the language differences.
Struggle of the continent to field a country able to work up through the global rankings seems to defy logic. Huge natural resource wealth, but the rivers, the coast, it is all working against the continent. Nobody has ever run the Congo River from top to bottom. 1,600 miles from the headwaters, it reaches the Atlantic Ocean here. Right here is where everyone who's tried has quit. 10 miles long, up to 4.5 miles wide, and littered with 20-foot standing waves, building-sized rocks, and whirlpools that look like they're out of a cartoon.
Wow, that does not look nice. Okay.
90 miles from where the river meets the ocean, Inga Rapids marks the end of the Congo River in its usefulness to Congo's place in the world. Sir H.M. Stanley of
Dr. Livingston, I presume,
after trying to run the whole thing but quitting at Inga Rapids, called it an immense tragedy, depriving the entire interior of Central Africa, 2/3 the size of mainland U.S., from the thing that all great powers need to become and stay great, a reliable flow of water that lets boats go from the interior of the country to the ocean.
Yeah, because that's an interesting line, especially to go back to his previous example of China, because like China finally stopped the Yellow River from flooding and moving hundreds of kilometers north and south, which has been the biggest detriment to Chinese civilization in the past. They were finally able to do that, but now they have obviously other problems. There's more than just that, but that certainly helped. Once we were able to control this, the rivers and seas like that, that's huge. The Congo looks like, I don't know if it could be done. Maybe in the future. I don't know how you would calm this thing down. I mean, that looks crazy. Those waves.
If you were to cut away all the ground so you could see the Congo River from the side, how it drops from its headwaters to where it reaches the ocean, this massive step is revealed. This is the Mississippi for comparison, a boat-friendly paradise. But even if the Congo was as flat as the Mississippi, it would run into one of the worst stretches of land on the entire planet for natural deepwater harbors. Untouched by glaciers, the coast of Africa is remarkably smooth.
Yeah, like I'm trying to think of history, I'm trying to think of like, if you look historically, the amount of like African empires, there really just hasn't been much. We talked about Egypt, but that was a while ago. I do think about the Mali Empire, but that might have just been, with Mansa Musa, the richest man in history, they say. That just was a singular moment. People have rise and falls. I mean, Mongolia had their own rise, just like YouTube channels. It's like PewDiePie. Look at the history of different channels like exploding throughout YouTube. Like some channels just have their moment, dream, and then they don't. But they have 1 year where they spike, or maybe it's like a 2 or 3 year period. Same exact thing in history and with history with empires. There's like a century where a nation does really well. Mongolia, I'm talking about the Mali Empire here, but it's hard to sustain that over long periods of time.
Few jagged indentations, too smooth. You see how the Chesapeake Bay is all jagged like this? It is perfect for trade. But these don't really exist on the coast of Africa. The continent, get this, has 20% of all the land on the planet, but because the coast is so smooth, very few indentations, it has less than 5% of the world's coastline. Europe has 7% of the...
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I did hear about that. Yeah, it's weird to think that like smoothness can be such a negative.
Land, 16% of the coastline. But to make things more difficult, the smoothness doesn't do much to slow or break up the energy of the open ocean like a jagged coast does. It slams into the continent, creating one of the most powerful ocean currents in the world very close to shore. Currents that sweep up the sediment West Africa's 2 rivers bring to the ocean and spread it out into any indentation where it can fit, like the few natural harbors Africa does have.
We'll see if, the one nation that's supposed to be a rising power is Nigeria in the next like 75 years. I mean, they're going to be the only nation that's growing in terms of population. Nigeria's got a lot of things to overcome, though.
Makes the task of keeping African ports open, deep enough for large ships, free from sandbars and shoals that are constantly forming, drifting, reforming, dredging it all away is a Sisyphean task that wasn't possible to do before sophisticated machinery. Africa never stood a chance to be one of the premier continents for trade once the oceans became the way.
It's so interesting because so much comes out of Africa. Human beings are thought to obviously originate from Africa. Africa has so many resources, yet it's like it was almost like this weird. It was almost like a video game. Like you can't give the spawn too many stats. You can't. You got to. I mean, we're gonna try to spawn kill human beings basically. Like you got to make sure that they travel and migrate throughout the world. So weird that happened. I mean, somewhat. Because obviously the early humans eventually settled in the Nile River, and those humans did pretty well for themselves for a while, but...
Goods are moved around the world. Russia sits in the middle of two crushing geographic puzzles.
I think this is my favorite country to talk about when it comes to their kryptonite, their Achilles heel.
First is what we're seeing in Ukraine. This area,
because they're so big and it's so easy to look at a map and be like afraid of Russia. But there's just so many little details that make them not as scary, that make China a much bigger threat. Like, I think maybe 15 years ago, when I really didn't understand much about any of this stuff, I probably thought that Russia was scary. But to be fair, 15 years ago was a long time ago, and China was definitely still on their rise. But I think I would look at a map and just be like, oh, Russia's big. That must mean power. No, China is so much more powerful. Way on the power rankings of all things, China's like, I don't know if I want to say 10 times stronger than Russia, but maybe 10 times stronger than Russia.
Land is so flat that it keeps Russia's generals up at night, not once, but twice.
Yes, he's going to be talking about...
Over the last 200 years, a European army has marched right up to Moscow.
Well, up to Moscow. So you got Napoleon from France, and then you got this mustache man from Germany during World War II, but there's also the invasion of... the Great Northern War with the Swedish Empire, and then there is a moment in history where the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth sieged Moscow, but that was over 200 years ago. I don't remember what century that was in. Maybe the 16th century or something.
Right, not once, but twice over the last 200 years, a European army has marched right up to Moscow. Napoleon captured it, but even if Russia did control that whole run of land, it still lacks the thing any true superpower must have: multiple deep, warm water ports that are attached to its mainland. To get to the Atlantic.
Yeah, it's big, but just like I talked about with Canada, a lot of it is not super useful. It has tons of resources, but it's hard to sustain a very large population. I mean, when the Soviet Union collapsed, that really, really hurt Russia. Because, I mean, look at all the extra land they had. They had the Caucasus nations here, these three nations. They had all of Central Asia, and the big stuff, they had even more of Eastern Europe, Ukraine, and Belarus, and they had the Baltic states a little bit there, and the Russian Empire had Finland. They still had, even the Soviet Union, though, still had their flaws. It still needed more, which is kind of crazy. That still wasn't even enough.
Russia either has to use its...
I don't even know what Russia should do. If I'm Russia and I can just, like, choose... If there was a way for me to make Russia... like, if I'm, like, playing God mode and I'm just, like, trying to make Russia a power, I don't even know what they do. They gotta, like, get annexed by China... Maybe then, or, I mean, they came very close when they had the Warsaw Pact and they controlled so much of Eastern Europe. Besides that, I think it would have helped a lot. Okay, I think the easiest thing to do is when they had all of Central Asia, have them somehow take out Iran. And, you know, they did do the invasion of Afghanistan. That was like to spread communism. But if they had a nice straight route out to the Indian Ocean, that'd be nice. Now, it wouldn't be a smooth route by any means, because Iran is extremely geographically jagged, mountains, hills. It's a mess.
Russia either has to use its one port in the north of the country, go through the choke point of the Baltic and through the Danish
or the Bosphorus Strait,
or down through Turkey, through the Mediterranean, and out into the Atlantic.
It's just a mess. Yeah, Russia, it looks like it should be more powerful than it is, but these are some very big problems that Russia faces. Now, Russia's going to have a better time with shipping with climate change, and when the Arctic Circle kind of begins to melt.
This is why Russia absolutely loves the idea of the polar ice caps melting a little bit further. If the north coast of Russia can stay warm enough year-round, its north coast becomes a bastion of deep water ports the length of its north coastline, which is very long.
That's terrifying to think of, because that would be the massive advantage that Russia would really need, that Russia's needed for a very, very long time. No country will probably benefit more from climate change than Russia. Canada will, a little bit, but the big one is Russia.
Meddling in the Middle East is in part to gain permanent access to a warm water port. They had their eye on the same port in Pakistan that China is currently trying to link to when they invaded Afghanistan in the 1970s. Very cozy with Syria on the western shore of the Mediterranean. Now, maybe Putin loves the Syrians, but more likely because the Assad regime had been for decades granting Russia complete and total access to their one major port.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, just any country that's not a part of the Cool Kids Club, and in this instance, the Cool Kids Club is anyone that's allied to the USA. So anyone that's not in that friend group, all the outcasts are going to be in their own friend group, and that is how you come up with Russia and Syria. Syria's not in that friend group anymore, but Russia, China, Venezuela, Cuba.
Wonderfully strategic spot right above the Suez Canal.
It used to be ideologies. Back in the day, the friend group was split because one friend group believed in one principle, and another friend group believed in another. Now, the ideologies doesn't even matter anymore. The democracy friend group won. Now the other friend group are just all the outcasts, kind of the weird kids. So I'm sorry to say, but the ones that got casted out. So, but they got to be careful because more and more members of the friend group keep getting casted out, and there's more people joining that disenfranchised friend group.
Russia's ships are allowed to come and go as they please. And yes, England, the textbook case of how technology can change everything. One of the reasons it was a world superpower for so long was because it's an island, 360-degree
which is a very similar advantage that Japan had as well.
Access to the ocean. It had a natural gap between constantly warring Europe and easy access to the flow of world.
I think Japan showed that if all of China was as fractured as the entire continent of Europe, then yeah, the Japanese probably would have been a much stronger power throughout most of history, I would argue. But China was mostly together, and they obviously had their civil wars, but they would come back together. And then they'd have hundreds of millions of Chinese would die, and then they'd come back together. And Japan briefly became a great power just because China had their century of humiliation. But the status quo was reestablished once China stopped that whole century of humiliation after the Chinese Civil War in 49.
Trade. But this was the day Britain's fate was sealed.
And here's the giant air armada Hitler hurls at England.
Planes. Flight changed the math from hours to slowly creep across the English Channel and invade by boat to 30 minutes for hundreds of bombers to be over downtown London. That made Britain susceptible, once again, to be invaded by, I'll only say it one more time, constantly warring Europe. From that point forward, the security of the U.S., surrounded by its two oceans.
Yeah, I mean, Britain was literally afraid of losing everything. I mean, they were worried about losing their sovereignty, which was not a thing that they really had to worry about much at all the previous centuries. So World War II was like the almost the death moment. They were willing to give up their entire empire just to not lose to the Germans, and they did.
Made keeping money in US dollars instead of the British pound obviously a safer bet. The reserve currency switched, causing money to flow out of Britain and into the US. There were other things leading up to Britain's fall, but the arrival of the Air Force was the decisive nail in the coffin. Napoleon was right.
Yeah, and then that's kind of the thing that would stop Japan. I mean, Japan would have needed, like I mentioned earlier, the entire Chinese mainland to be as fractured and broken up as Europe is for them to have their moment. But now it's too late with planes. I mean, water. The small strip of water doesn't mean as much. Now, America's advantage is we have two oceans. Maybe one day the oceans won't mean as much.
On a scale of 1 to 10, only one country today ranks at 10 for the three most important questions. Can you feed your people? Can you be invaded? Can you trade? Everything else builds on that. Politics, the economy, culture, it all must sprout from the land upon which it sits. That does not mean it's the only or single determining factor, not at all. But it is the point to start from. So when we ask, is America in decline? The first mention of American decline that I could find was back in 1930. Yet here we are, almost 100 years later, because the idea that the US is going to spontaneously collapse ignores the thing that's guided human civilization since the beginning of time. Until something about the land underneath a nation changes, that country's position of power in the world is unlikely to change.
And the only way, like I said earlier, this is what I was going to mention earlier, the only way that happens is through division. There's an old KGB Soviet interview. This guy was a spy for the Soviet Union, and he literally says it for everyone, that the way to defeat the Soviet Union is through internal struggle, is through us fighting. I mean, basically, to lose our massive advantage we have in the world, the U.S. does, we would need like another civil war, and we would need to be broken apart. We would need to be splintered. That's the only way that the world somehow gets a way to catch up or breaks apart the American superpower, is if there's another civil war, or there's balkanization, or if states leave the union somehow, you know what I mean? That's it. So basically, it's just internal fighting. And I think that's important a message to drive home that I'm kind of always thinking about, especially in times like this where, you know, there's a lot of political division inside of the country, but there's a ton of outside forces that are really pushing that need that, because it's the only way they can defeat us. They can't invade. Invading at this point with technology is going to be basically impossible. Maybe that'll change in the future, but basically internal strife has been the strategy that the entire world has been trying to do since after World War II. So for 75 years now. So I hope that at the end of the day, the political division can end eventually. Not to say this is the first time in, you know, American history that we've had political division like this. I mean, in the 60s and 70s, I mean, there was a ton of political leaders being shot. I mean, the damn President JFK Kennedy got shot, you know, in Dallas. So I think we still have a while to go. Maybe. I mean, it's a different type of political division that we have right now. Very different than the 60s and 70s, but it's definitely concerning, and I hope that eventually there is unity, because that is the only way we can be defeated. And it's scary because I'm sure there's definitely a lot of Americans, I'm sure, that would love to just form their own part of the U.S. and make that their own country, and then another political aisle make this part of the U.S. their own country. You're basically just nuking yourself, the other guy, and yourself. It's not worth it. Yeah, so I think that's just something to keep in mind, and I'm always keeping that in mind, is hopefully there can be some political healings at some point in the future, but unfortunately there's not enough people, I think, that are touching grass. We need more people to touch grass outside. If you've ever played Civilization, the one major factor that influences, this is how I learned about all this stuff, is through the Civilization franchise. How well your game is going to go is your starting location. Yeah, where you're going to put your first city, your capital city, basically that determines everything. That's why people just re-roll that much a lot of times in that game. I get the point that people often exaggerate America's decline, but the video skips some real issues. Decline isn't always a sudden crash. It can be slow and relative. Yeah, look at the Roman Empire. The U.S. might still be growing, but at the same time losing global share and influence. Things like rising debt, inequality, political polarization, and demographic shifts are a serious problem. Strong institutions and public trust matter just as much as money and military power, and those foundations don't look unshakable right now. So instead of calling decline a myth, it makes more sense to admit it's a real risk, not guaranteed, but serious enough that the U.S. needs reform and renewal. A risk. I agree that it's a risk. Everything that's happening here is certainly a risk. I think it is built in, like I said, because all this stuff could only be for the next 10, 20, 30 years, but everything that he mentioned above is built in and permanent. So even though we struggle and we could be in decline for, 50 years, 100 years, the things he talked about above are pretty permanent, depending on how much technology changes. So that is something to definitely keep in mind. The world is littered with ruins of empires that once believed they were eternal. That is 100% for sure. Also, to add, World War II is a huge success for American homogeneity. Why? Britain went bankrupt. USSR just lost 200 million of its people. Japan, Germany, Italy lost the war. France got occupied. China went into civil war. Basically, all of the top great powers at the time lost their power so much. And guess who filled the void? Yeah, the USA. I've talked about that so many times. Maxonomics. That was a fantastic video. Very cool. Definitely go check out this channel. DruuuWu Labubu. Drew's AI girlfriend. LuxembourgLover. LoreTrack. William. Never change Drew. Unless you want to. Nolan. AlexandertheTerrible. NordTyrol. Miglu the Goat. KingBearHaze. Connor Pavlik. Fredrik Tibblin. And Tambre. To all my Patreon subscribers this month, thank you. If you want your name here, check the description down below.